share with our viewers today what happened to me. I was searching through some emails and up popped an incident that I had shared a while ago. And what happened was another homeschooling dad and I got into a light, let's call it a debate, not an argument, about something. I'll share that now. But what it reminded me of is that when you learn something through a story, it often sticks in your brain far better than when you just learn something for a test, like we did at school, rote memorization of facts, because it's kind of disconnected from real life. And so you don't often remember it. Mm-hmm. So what happened in this incident, and it was a year or so ago, this guy and I had this argument, and we were discussing weather because there was talk of bad weather coming. And somehow we got on the topic of the barometer and whether it's a drop in the barometer needle or an increase in air pressure that causes bad weather. And I was trying to rack my brains and remember, what did we learn in geography at school about where air flows from high pressure to low pressure and therefore low pressure? And I was all confused. And he said, it's low pressure that brings a storm. The needle must drop. And I'm like, are you sure? But and we're like discussing this. And then he said, but I've been reading this book called Rescue in the Pacific, which is a story of a yacht that was shipwrecked. And part of the suspense of the story was that the characters were on a flat ocean with beautiful weather, but they saw the needle of the barometer dropping, and it kept on dropping. And that made them really anxious. And then this storm hit. So he knew without a question, without a doubt, that it's a dropping barometer needle that brings a storm. And it was because he had read it in a story. Whereas I was trying to remember what I'd studied for a test 35 years ago in primary school, and that information had no relevance to anything. It wasn't tied to a memory or a story or an experience of my own or an experience I'd read about. And so I couldn't remember the details. Yeah. And it just supports that quote that we've read. Actually, we've got a couple of quotes about how you have a scaffold of information in your mind, and you can hang things on it and connect things to that scaffold. Yeah. And then it stays in the structure of your brain far better than if it's just wishing in and out.
And also you probably find that he was stirred in the reading of that story, thinking about, well, what would, how would I feel if I were in the situation that those sailors were? And that's one of the things that a living book does. It makes us feel. Yes. And sometimes we can feel negatively. In fact, recently I started reading a highly recommended book, won all sorts of awards. And I got halfway through it and I thought, sure, I'm feeling, and this book has an excellent storyline. But and some of the feelings that I had were uncomfortable and challenging, and I wasn't shying away from that. But I just thought, I'm not going to wade through the rest of this book because of the smut that was involved in it. But a good book will make you respond to it in a certain way. And I think that through the years of providing footprints to families and using a literature-based curriculum, we have seen our children feel stuff and connect with the subject that we're reading about. I remember my kids still, and we're talking about children that are just short of 30 now, who read a book in kindergarten sunlight called My Father's Dragon, and they can still quote from that book when the mouse gets his consonants all mixed up. And they can remember it because it stirred up humor inside them. And if we think of some of the families who've come back to us after using little footprints and just saying what has happened in their children's lives, in particular, the two that I can remember is a young boy getting fascinated with our storybook on eagles and ending up working at a bird sanctuary in KwaZulu-Natal at the tender age of 7, and he continued to work there all the way through his schooling years. And then in our sailing book in Footprints, the one kid just loved tying those sailor knots that we've got as an activity, and he ended up getting into dinghy sailing and into yachting, and then ended up getting his skipper's license. So those sorts of things are are so valuable, and they probably wouldn't have just come about if it was being rote learning in a textbook for a test. They responded to the information in the stories.
Yes, absolutely. And I always think of how when you've got the framework of a puzzle laid out, it's so much easier to fit pieces in. And that's how I see some of the information and learning that happens, where stories give us a good framework. And then as we go through life, we get more detail as we mature. But because we've read a story about something, we've actually got a full color picture in our brain, even of what happened and how people felt and what that experience was like, rather than just reading the dry facts like I used to have to read when we were at school. History was just names and dates and information, whereas when you read a story of somebody who lived it, you've got, it's like full color. It's
Absolutely.
like seeing the movie.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we believe. That's how we structured our programs and how we've raised our kids. And I think it also comes out at different times, in different seasons of life. The kids will say, oh, do you remember this, or do you remember that? And then have a good old chuckle around books that have meant something to them through their years. And it's such a pleasurable way to learn alongside your kids, because you're not doing this only for them. The benefit that you get as a parent, having your schooling redone in this way, is just fantastic. So yeah, literature-based learning is the way to go, I think.